we must commit now to be in this fight for the long haul. We must remain unified today and tomorrow and the day after, and for the years and decades to come. It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay, because the darkness that drives autocracy is ultimately no match for the flame of liberty that lights the souls of free people everywhere.
President Biden speaking in Poland yesterday. Here to discuss that and more, Ramesh Ponnuru, the new editor of the National Review, former DNC chair Donna Brazil, the Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, and Wall Street Journal national security reporter Vivian Salama. Donna, that speech in Warsaw, the White House really raised expectations for it. This was a major address. Obviously, he said this is the fight of all time.
Yes.
Did he meet the moment?
I thought so. Some people describe it as Churchillian. Some other, it was inspiring. It was powerful. He spoke to me. I don't know if he spoke to others when he said, "Be not afraid," quoting Pope John Paul. He said, "Every generation must choose its battle, and democracy is the battle of our lifetime." It was powerful. I know everyone is focusing on those 9 words, "for God's sake." But I think we should focus on the core message, is that the United States will stand with our NATO allies. The United States has committed more resources to help the Ukrainians, and that the country understood its role in this battle.
Well, we'll get to those 9 words in a minute, but Ramesh, he did outline this as basically the ultimate struggle of our time. And seemed to be saying this is about much more than Ukraine, and this is not going to be over anytime soon.
The very broad outlines of his policy, I think, command a consensus in the country. That is, we are going to support the Ukrainians and we're going to avoid a direct military conflict. I think the debate in the U.S. has been over the parameters of that. So are we supporting enough? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do less? And then the execution of it. And I think that's where we get back into those 9 words. I think that did create some doubt about whether President Biden is in control of his own administration or in control of himself at all times. I think that it is not good if you have a Churchillian speech followed by cleanup from your own administration.
And Jeffrey, the cleanup. So the 9 words, of course, that he must go. He must not remain in power, meaning Vladimir Putin. For God's sakes, he must not remain in power. And then the White House comes out and says, no, he wasn't calling for...
Yeah.
He wasn't calling for it to be removed from power.
At that point, they probably should not have walked it back and just left it out there ambiguously or non-ambiguously, as the case may be. The argument that we're hearing is that he didn't mean what the plain meaning of the words are. And you know, and it is. I mean, look, the speech was a very powerful speech. It's true. It is also true that when you're calling for regime change in a nuclear state, that's a policy that you might want to think through before you do it. And Joe Biden, as a veteran of the Obama administration, obviously, understood that how presidents can get tripped up by rhetorical flourishes. President Obama and the red line, for instance.
Which was a response to a question. It wasn't a planned statement.
Right. And you know, all sympathy to Joe Biden. These trips are difficult. This is an emotional moment. And of course, how could you not want a monster, a person he describes as a monster, to be removed? Nevertheless, this is a nuclear power, and a person who's in a corner and has nuclear weapons is a more dangerous foe than one who doesn't feel like he's in a total corner. And so it's a tough moment.
And to quote another thing from Biden, a president's words matter, but Vivian, is there any doubt that he was not saying what he believes?
President Biden is going to say what President Biden wants to say, and so it is important. And we've seen this actually in the last couple of weeks. He called President Putin a war criminal before they officially came out and declared, as from the State Department, that they believe that Russian forces were committing war crimes. He also called him a butcher this weekend. And so you don't necessarily see that reflecting in official U.S. policy, but obviously the president is going to go out there and he's going to basically project what he believes. The White House has said it all along, even with his war criminal comments, they said he was speaking from the heart. And so this is something that President Biden has a history of doing. But whether or not U.S. foreign policy will officially reflect that remains to be seen. something like calling for regime change or even just suggesting the notion of regime change has a lot of landmines. The U.S. has obviously a dark cloud over it for a long history of seeming like they are meddling in other countries' affairs, and trying, even suggesting regime change suggests that the U.S. would somehow get involved in that. And so obviously U.S. foreign policy very, very careful to not suggest that, because that creates a lot of problems down the line for the U.S.
So think about his audience. His audience was the entire world, including the Russian people, and he spoke directly to them.
Yeah.
I know, look.
You are not our enemy. He said.
Right, that's right. And we all know that Mr. Putin doesn't like opposition. I mean, he's eliminated most of the opposition in Russia. I mean, we know what happens when the Russian people stand up against their government and their leader. So I do believe that this was a real important moment for America to not just lead on the issue of democracy, but also lead the international community. And I believe overall his trip was a successful trip, because he did what we wanted him to, I think Americans, what we wanted him to do, was to show leadership on the international stage.
It's hard to take issue with his characterization of Putin as a butcher or as a war criminal, or even his desire that he be ultimately removed from power. But how do you get from those words to a solution, any kind of a diplomatic solution? I mean, where does this go?
You know, and then the other problem is, if you do have an announced policy of regime change or wish of regime change, that raises the question, so what's the plan? How are you going to do this? Which is another reason you don't want to get into this territory. Right now, I think we are looking at continued bloody stalemate, and it is, you know, there are no signs that that is going to change, and we're going to be, I think, probably having the same basic kind of conversation next week and the week after.
Well, wasn't it just haunting to see those missile strikes in Lviv? Yeah. You know, just what, 40, 50 miles from NATO's border, right? At a time when Biden had just been there,
right? So, you know, just to add something to what Donna said, you know, this is an extraordinarily emotional trip for Joe Biden. He's at the end of the trip. He's seen
his refugees.
He's seen horrors, and so it's completely understandable that you want the monster to go. Yes. And you know, and just to add on to sort of the framing that you provided, that says that overall it was a successful trip. If you really look at it, you sort of step back or step up. You know, America in some ways is back. I mean, I hate to use sort of the sloganeering version of that, but European country after European country wants the U.S. behind it, right by its side. The Polish people are very, very happy to see an American president. I mean, things have become clarified, and this trip was very, very useful in terms of clarifying who the free people of Europe want on their side and who they're scared of. So that was all very useful. And of course, Putin is playing right into it by firing missiles at Lviv, by behaving like a monster. So it's all, I mean, in the broader context, it was obviously a successful trip, and something that he should do again and again and again to remind the world that America is fundamentally different than Russia and also China.
John, I mean, just to directly answer that question as well, President Putin knows that he can kind of go up to the line without crossing it, and that crossing being to hit a NATO country. This is something that
there is a margin of error. I mean, what happens?
Completely so, and it's obviously, I mean, we see now that he has no real boundaries as far as, you know, invading a sovereign country, and just the extent of the damage that he has inflicted upon Ukraine. But this is also something that President Volodymyr Zelensky has been insisting all along, is that we are not part of NATO, and so ultimately, regardless of anything, even if he gets within 5 miles of the Polish border, we are on our own, because we are not part of NATO, and NATO will not act unless it is actually hit.
We might see, just a quick note, we might see in the fullness of time that the most important thing that Joe Biden said in that speech was not 1 inch. That it was a very direct and forceful reminder to Russia that
And
cross into NATO territory, all bets are off.
And that was, let's face it, a red line, even if he didn't say.
Well, but that's a stated red line. That is a red line that actually exists.
All right, I want to turn to Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, and her text messages. I want to highlight one other text message. This is one that she sent to Mark Meadows, Chief of Staff, on January 10th. We are living through what feels like the end of America. Most of us are disgusted with the VP, she's talking about Mike Pence, and are in listening mode to see where to fight with our teams. Those who attack the Capitol are not representative of our great team of patriots for DJT. I mean, Ramesh, explain. Just explain. What is this?
Well, this is a conservative activist who went pretty far down the rabbit hole of conspiratorial thinking and apocalyptic thinking, and was encouraged by then-President Trump to believe a lot of nonsense about what had happened in the 2020 election.
Is that so? Pence? I mean, so Trump was encouraging her, or she was encouraging? I mean, where was the nonsense running to and from?
Well, it may have been one of those echo chamber sorts of things where people spin themselves up and spin one another up. So yeah, it's very dismaying. And in fact, she took what was one of the most honorable and shining moments of Vice President Pence's career, when he stood up to the pressure and fulfilled his constitutional duty and said that she was disgusted by it. And I think that it speaks very, very poorly about her judgment.
Senator Klobuchar made a pretty powerful case, it seemed, for Thomas to recuse himself. Do you agree with that?
I think whether Justice Thomas recuses himself in a future case is going to have to depend on the facts of that case. You know, if it's something that involves specific records involving his wife, then I think he's going to have to recuse himself. But there's now also this appearance of impropriety question, which is going to affect how he evaluates any of those future cases. And frankly, I would not be surprised if the Supreme Court were that much more likely to want to stay out of future cases involving the January 6th committee, for example.
You know, when Justice Roberts concluded that a press report of the exchange between Mr. Gorsuch and Ms. Sotomayor was in error, the Supreme Court put out a statement.
Right.
I would hope that they would put out a statement. Now,
a statement saying what?
A statement to the fact that the judge, Justice Thomas, would recuse himself on any cases involving the January 6th.
But that's not the court to say, that's Thomas to say, right?
Yes, it is, but I still believe that there needs to be a statement. Look, I think she was unhinged. I know she's a conservative activist. I'm an activist.
Yeah, it
but
seemed
boy, that went really over the top. Seriously, you got to look at it.
Have a great career on Twitter, I think. I mean, that would be a good place. But, you know, the point, going to your question, Justice Roberts could walk down the hall and just pop into Justice Thomas's chambers and says, we have a little bit of a mess, and I would like to say something about this. But the Supreme Court is self-regulating. We know that. The Supreme Court sets its own...
The only court in the land not guided by
that's why it's supreme. You know, I mean, they are in charge of their own ethics, and they are in charge of their own appearance, and they've got a problem.
Yeah.
But to the question of impropriety, there's already this lingering question over Justice Thomas because of the fact that he was the only justice to block the January 6th committee from getting former President Trump's papers. And so you already have this lingering over him. And now for future cases as well, there's going to be intense scrutiny about any decisions he's making that has any link to what happened.
And Donald, before I've got to get your thoughts on the Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmation hearing.
We were promised by Minority Leader McConnell that it would be a fair process, free of rancor. And within 30 minutes or 60 minutes, the first question, on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me about your religion, your religious. There's no religious test. And then, of course, the other one, define a woman. And the best one was, and you know, for me to watch these proceedings, to quote Dr. King, and then to turn Dr. King into somebody who's against the people who are still fighting for that dream.
Yeah, no, it's pretty. It was pathetic. But this focus on child pornography and pedophiles.
QAnon.
I mean, there was a message to QAnon, wasn't? I mean, these are not major cases. These were sentencing decisions.
I think that we had a confirmation process where the conclusion that she's going to get confirmed was pretty much foregone by everybody. And so some Republicans, a few Republicans, wanted to take some shots and make some political points. And some Democrats found it in their interest to act as though those people represented the entire Republican Party, and that was what the entire confirmation hearing was about, when in fact the majority of the questioning was not only normal, but kind of anticlimactic.
Majority. I mean, there was a lot of questioning on pedophiles. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you very much to the roundtable. We will be right back.
Justice Thomas has to recuse himself from anything related to the Trump administration, anything related to the January 6th Commission, or anything related to our effort to hold individuals accountable for their participation in this attack on our democracy.
Justice Thomas could make his decisions like he's made them every other time. It's his decision based upon law. If he sees it's not upholding the Constitution, he'll rule against it.
Some reaction to those extraordinary text messages revealing that Ginny Thomas, the conservative activist married to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, urged Donald Trump's White House chief of staff to overturn the 2020 election in the days and weeks after the vote, just as Trump and his allies were promising to take their case to the Supreme Court. Here to discuss that and more is Senator Amy Klobuchar, member of the Judiciary Committee. Before we get to matters related to the Supreme Court, I want to ask you about President Biden's speech and that line that we all heard him say very bluntly, this man, Vladimir Putin, cannot remain in power. I mean, wasn't he saying exactly what he believed?
First, the White House has clarified that he was talking about the region and that he was talking about that Vladimir Putin has got to stay out of NATO countries, something he specifically said in his speech. But I think what General Petraeus said was meaningful here. We know the policy of our country. We know what it is. I think Vladimir Putin knows what it is, and certainly our NATO allies and Americans know what it is. We're part of NATO. We're doing all we can to protect those NATO countries, doubling the number of troops in Poland that I just visited a few weeks ago. Incredible command there, incredible leadership, giving them significant military assistance that is so necessary, and we have done a lot, and we should do more. But beyond that, our policy is clear. NATO is a defensive alliance. The president has said it himself. And we will do all we can to help Ukraine. And you can see the strength of that help coming through with the fact that they've literally pushed Russian troops back from Kyiv.
And that message came through. But as you know, during the campaign, I mean, you ran against Joe Biden. You know full well what he said. He said, the words of a president matter. And that was the headline around the world. That was the message heard in Moscow. That's what the Russians are responding to. And whatever walkback there is, his words cannot remain in power.
Having stood there myself on that border and embraced those kids, the refugees coming in, hearing about the horror, they leave there with nothing on their leaving everything they have behind, everything, their little stuffed animals in their backpacks, moms with suitcases leaving their husbands behind to fight. Yes, the moment is clear. Vladimir Putin is a monster, but the position of the United States government is not to send troops in there. It is to give all the aid we can to Ukraine, which includes Switchblade drones, incredible drones that have done a lot of damage to the Russian army. And you've got to the Russian planes. You have got Stingers, 800 more Stingers, thousands of more Javelins, and we're doing more and more and more, and we must. I have personally advocated for doing more. That's what this is, and it's the humanitarian aid, over $1 billion pledge, taking in 100,000 refugees. That is what we are doing.
And it's not regime change in Moscow.
Okay, that has been made very clear.
Okay, let's turn to matters related to the High Court. You saw those text messages from Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas, his wife. I want to read just two of them. One on November 6th, she said, "Do not concede. It takes time for the army who is gathering for his back." And then on November 19th, sounds like Sidney, meaning Sidney Powell, and her team are getting inundated with evidence of fraud. Make a plan, release the Kraken, and save us from the left taking America down. I mean, my goodness.
Jonathan, the facts are clear here. This is unbelievable. You have the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice advocating for an insurrection, advocating for overturning a legal election to the sitting president's chief of staff. And she also knows this election, these cases are going to come before her husband. This is a textbook case for removing him, recusing him from these decisions. And I don't think, all I hear is silence from the Supreme Court right now, and that better change in the coming week, because every other federal judge in the country, except Supreme Court justices, would have a guidance from ethics rules that says you got to recuse himself. Thomas himself recused himself in 1995 from a case involving a school because his son was going to that school. Justice Breyer recused himself when his wife was on the board of an entity, and that case came before the Supreme Court.
Okay, and if he doesn't recuse himself?
The entire integrity of the court is on the line here. And they had better speak out on this, because you cannot have a justice hearing cases related to this election. And in fact, the ethics rules that apply to all the other federal judges say that if it involves a family member, appearance of impartiality, they have to recuse themselves. So not only should he recuse himself, but this Supreme Court badly needs ethics rules. Chris Murphy's leading a bill I've long been supportive of that says basically get your act together, get ethics rules in place. And I would hope Justice Roberts, who I respect, will stand up and get those ethics rules in place. They've got to do that. They should do it themselves.
All right, so Ketanji Brown Jackson, I mean, some fascinating questions from your Republican colleagues, but Joe Manchin's on board. Her confirmation seems to be given. Is she going to get Republican support? What are you hearing?
I think she is. She has in every other nomination that she's had for various levels of the courts. And I would make very clear here, she's not going to get confirmed in 2 years. She's not going to get confirmed in 2 months. She's going to get confirmed in 2 weeks. And so much of that has to do with her vast experience, more judicial experience than 4 of the justices that currently sit on that court, but also the pillar of strength, how she handled those attacks and just sat there and answered their questions. And she literally is the first black woman to serve on the Supreme Court. When she walks into that court with her head held high, every little girl and boy in America is going to know that anything and everything is possible.
I mean, it is clear that the overwhelming majority of Republicans will vote against her. Lindsey Graham, in an interview with the Washington Post, said that when all Democrats voted against Amy Coney Barrett, they set a precedent. This is what he said. Is that the new norm? If that's going to be the new norm, what do you do when one party has the Senate and the other party has the White House? How do you ever get anybody confirmed? I mean, what has happened to this process? I mean, we had Scalia overwhelmingly confirmed, Ruth Bader Ginsburg overwhelmingly confirmed, Sandra Day O'Connor. Now, I mean, we're going to have a court where nobody had the majority of both parties.
I'm not going to relitigate the whole past, but remember the unique circumstances with Amy Coney Barrett where Mitch McConnell shoved through that nomination right before an election. That aside, what we have here is someone who is highly qualified, who has gotten votes of Republicans in the past, and those Republicans, at least 2 of them, have issued positive statements in the months leading up to this hearing. And so I believe she will get Republican support. I can't tell you who, I can't tell you how much, but I think that will be very important to this process.
All right, Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you for being here on set with us on This Week.
Thank you. It was great to be on, Jonathan.
About that, we saw President Biden's speech in Warsaw outlined this basically as the struggle, the fight of our time. But there was that line at the end of his speech where he said flatly that Putin must go, that this man must not remain in power. Obviously, that's not the policy, but how does something like that, and made headlines all around the world, how does that complicate the efforts to resolve this situation?
Well, I mean, it reminds us that message discipline has its virtues. That was reportedly very clearly an unscripted moment, in addition, in the emotion of that very emotional moment. And, you know, it will cause some challenges down the road. It will disappear, you know, the headlines will move on to something else within a few days. But in the mind of Putin, who's someone who has, you know, watched and rewatched, you know, old videos of Gaddafi being taken and killed, this kind of thing, it will play on his mind, and it could complicate matters going down the road. Look, I think President Biden would be the first, knowing him, he'd be the first to say, oops, you know, okay, hey guys, okay, well, let's get on with it. And this should not overshadow what was an extraordinarily important and successful trip to Europe, one that the U.S. really led, as it has done so impressively, really, throughout this entire effort, and pulled together, guided, and then ultimately with this speech, it was a very, very strong statement, obviously.
I want to ask you a little flashback here to a statement made by the president of Poland visiting Tbilisi, Georgia, after the Russians invaded Georgia back in 2008. A statement that echoes today. He said at that time, again, this is 2008, today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, the day after tomorrow the Baltic states, and later perhaps time will come for my country, Poland. Obviously, you know, Ukraine did come. Is there a concern here that whatever ends up resolving this, if there is a resolution here with the Russians backing down, that giving them, rewarding them in any way for this is ultimately a green light for Putin's ultimate plan to rebuild the Russian Empire?
Jonathan, I tend to think that this has complicated any ambitions that he might have had very, very considerably. This is going to set back his military for years. It's shown the whole world that it wasn't the wonderfully modernized force that, you know, everybody thought it might be. This has been a huge challenge for the Russians. You know, the fact that they've lost 7 generals just because they can't command and control sufficiently, they have to get out of their armored vehicles and go forward to find out why are they stopped again, this kind of thing. So I tend to think that his ambitions are going to be seriously set back by what takes place in Ukraine, noting that this is by no means nearing a conclusion.
All right, General David Petraeus, thank you very much for joining us on This Week.